All right. Hey guys, welcome back. This lecture, we're going to finish talking about some westward expansion, and we're going to hit up the war that America fought against Mexico. You guessed it, because historians are the worst. It's called the Mexican-American War. So let's talk about the election of 1844. Texas was a critical issue in this election. Recall that in 1836, Texas had fought a war of independence against Mexico. Mexico itself had become independent from Spain in 1821. And Texas won that war of independence with the dramatic and absolutely surprising Battle of San Jacinto, where Sam Houston and his rebel group of roughneck Texans, very vastly outnumbered by the Mexican President Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna's much larger force, will actually come out victorious. They will capture the Mexican president and force him to basically give up and surrender Texas. Although Mexico contests this, Texas was independent from 1836 to 1845, and it was known as the Lone Star Republic, which is why our flag is has that one star on it. And this Republic of Texas will actually be recognized by President Andrew Jackson right before he leaves office. So the United States had recognized Texas. But keep in mind, both Jackson and Van Buren, again, they could not actually bring up the issue of annexing or adding Texas as part of the Union, even though many of those American settlers, not so much the Tejano settlers, but many of the American white settlers in Texas wanted Texas to be part of the United States. They wanted that protection. They wanted that ease of interstate commerce and everything else that a alliance with the United States would offer. But the United States was not willing to annex Texas because of the issue of slavery, because Texas would have entered as a slave state, and that would have thrown out the balance of power in the United States Senate. Remember, that is an ongoing issue. So all of that is going down. Now in 1844, we had that very short presidency, just 32 days long, of William Henry Harrison, the winner of Tippecanoe. And remember, in his campaign song, it was Tippecanoe and Tyler too. And so John Tyler was the vice president. He became president after Harrison's 32 days in office. Remember, Harrison died of basically a cold. And so John Tyler, his accidency, the Democrat who wasn't running as a Democrat, who had alienated all the Democrats because he hated Jackson, but alienated all the Whigs because he supported all of the Democratic policies. He had no political base of support. So Tyler tried to drum up support for his campaign in 1844. And keep in mind, he was never elected president. He was the vice president. He was the first vice president to ascend to the presidency, because Harrison was the first president we've had die in office. So Tyler is trying to, for the first time, run on his own. Oh, and by the way, there's a Tyler, Texas in East Texas. It's named because the way Tyler tries to get some support, because he has no support from the Democrats or the Whigs, this new second party system, is he tries to drum it up by the issue of Texas, saying that he'll be the president if elected in his own right that will get America Texas. And it becomes a huge campaign issue, but Tyler doesn't have any support, so we know he's going to lose. More on that later. The Whigs nominate as their favorite son Henry Clay. Henry Clay has wanted to be president for a very long time. Remember, he ran for president in 1824. That was literally 20 years before this. I mean, he has been trying and trying. He's been Speaker of the House. He's been Secretary of State. He's been all these important positions. Give the man a break. He overwhelmingly gets the Whig nomination. So Henry Clay is the Whig running for president, and he thinks this is his moment to shine in the sun. Okay. Now on the Democratic side, they were really split. Okay. Martin Van Buren, who had lost in 1840, was trying to come back, because you could do that. You could run non-consecutive terms. So, Donald Trump just lost the 2020 election here while I'm recording this in November. He only served 4 years. If he is still alive, because he is quite elderly, if he is still alive and kicking and he wanted to, and he received the Republican nomination, Donald Trump could run again in 2024. That is possible. We've had one president in our nation's history, Grover Cleveland, in the 1890s, that actually did this. He ran and won a non-consecutive second term. So somebody else won after him, and then he ran again. So Martin Van Buren is trying to come back up, but the Democrats are not really having any of it. Remember, Van Buren was not really that fairly, because it was really Jackson's bank wars that had led to a lot of the financial destabilization and the panic of 1837. But because of all that, Martin Van Buren wasn't seeing a lot of love from the Democrats, the party that he, by the way, helped to form. And there was Cassius Clay, and not Cassius Clay, that's Muhammad Ali. Lewis Cass. There we go. Cassius Clay. Sorry. Was another prominent Democrat from the North. Martin Van Buren was also from the North, from New York. But the dark horse candidate, the one who's going to emerge on the Democratic nomination in the election of 1844, was this complete unknown. That's what a dark horse candidate is. It's somebody who, like in a horse race, it's that horse that just shoots out of nowhere from the back and suddenly wins the race, and you're like, where'd they come from? Where were they? What their jockey doing? So that's this candidate that comes forth, this dark horse candidate named James K. Polk. And Polk had been the governor of Tennessee. You know, that's also a role that Sam Houston had once had. There are a lot of prominent politicians coming from Tennessee these days, right? Andrew Jackson, Sam Houston, James K. Polk. But Polk was kind of on the decline. He'd lost his reelection for governor, and he wasn't really seen as a serious candidate, but he's going to get the nomination. And Henry Clay is just like, oh, Democrats, what are you doing? This is going to be too easy. And of course, Henry Clay loses again. Stuck to Congress, right? So James K. Polk wins the election, and he primarily campaigned on basically three things: that he was going to lower tariffs, Southerners like that; he's going to get us Oregon, so Westerners like that; and he's going to make sure we get Texas. And hey, everybody likes that because we like Texas. Just kidding. Lots of people did not like the idea of Texas, because Texas would have been an additional slave state. But Polk didn't really talk about the slavery issue because he was a slaveholder, so that was null and mute. And Texas becomes the winning ticket, and Polk wins the election by a very narrow margin, beating out the Whig Henry Clay. Sorry, Mr. Clay. So that is how Polk gets elected. First dark horse candidate, first candidate to come out of nowhere to win. And what happens with Texas, and why we have a city in East Texas called Tyler, is because John Tyler kind of steals the show by basically in March, just literally days before James Polk is sworn into office, Congress, by a joint resolution, will pass the treaty to annex Texas as part of the United States. We kind of rips the rug right under the floor of Polk. But Polk's like, hey, I campaigned on this. It already happened. I'm that good. And we still got Oregon to worry about. So Texas does become part of the United States there in 1845, just days before Polk is sworn in. So technically under the Tyler presidency. And with this annexation of Texas, this opens up a lot of, I was going to say a lot of worms. You know what I mean? Like a can of worms has just been like opened, okay? Because the border with Mexico and Texas was very undefined. And by undefined, I mean there were conflicting opinions on where it was. For the Mexicans, they believed it was at the Nueces River, which would be like where my mouse is going. Okay, so like a whole big chunk of like the valley just totally cut off. For the United States, and for Texans now who have agreed to join their republic to the United States, and by the way, Texas as a republic had had its own presidents, its own constitution, all this, it definitely, you know, it allowed slavery. Texas does enter as a slave state. But Texas, its first president was Sam Houston, the guy who got them their victory, and that's San Jacinto, and brilliant kind of Washington-esque figure for our Republic of Texas. And And the third president will again be Sam Houston. And it was funny, the capital kept moving between Austin and Houston. Every time Houston was elected the president of Texas, he moved the capital to Houston. But anyway, more on Sam Houston later, because I love talking about that guy. But we got Texas, and this border is very disputed between Mexico and the United States now. For the United States, they believe the border of Texas to be at the Rio Grande River, the Rio Grande, which is today the current border, which should tell you what's going to happen. But that is a big point of conflict. And also, from Mexico's perspective, they had believed that Texas was still theirs to begin with, and B, they were kind of tolerant of this Texas Republic thing up there anyway, because there weren't that many people that lived there. It was like less than 200,000 white American settlers. Mexico was just kind of biding its time, saying, okay, eventually when we sort out our internal disputes and civil wars and stuff, we can go back and very easily grab Texas up again. There weren't that many people there. But now that it's owned by the United States, they don't have that buffer anymore. And they also have lost any shot at being able to take Texas back. So they're not okay with America just annexing it. This is going to cause problems. It's going to lead to the Mexican-American War. Now with Oregon, one of Polk's campaign slogans was 54-40 or fight. Now, what the heck does that mean? 54 is the 54th parallel or line of latitude, like way up here in Canada, okay? And the 54th parallel is what Polk and his Democratic supporters were saying they wanted the border to be, that we would take the Oregon country, because there were many settlers following the Oregon Trail. I hope you've played that game when you were in middle school. The Oregon Trail is an excellent game for learning how so many people that moved west in the 1800s died from dysentery, which was very true. The part where you can eat as a family an entire buffalo in like a day, that part's not so true. Also horrifying. But yeah, the Oregon country, Polk wants to grab this for the United States, and he wants the border between us and Canada, which at this time was still owned by the British, to be at the 54th parallel, 54th line of latitude, way up there. He says, if we don't get it, we're going to fight for it. Well, it turns out we don't need to fight for it. We work out an agreement with Great Britain to create the permanent border you see right here, this very straight line at the 49th parallel. And that is the current border. And a lot of that was already kind of agreed to by the London Convention of 1818. Remember, that was a deal worked out between Britain and our Secretary of State under Monroe, John Quincy Adams. And Britain was okay with this because there were a lot more American settlers out here than there were British, and Britain also negotiated fishing rights off of Vancouver Island right there. So they were kind of cool with it. It was fine. They got the border secured. That was done. So Polk literally, like, very quickly on in his 4 years as president, because he's only going to serve 4 years. He's actually, I mean, I'm not like a huge Polk fan because, the slavery stuff and the fact that he ignored it and probably perpetuated the Civil War. So I'm not a huge Polk fan, but I will give the man props that basically he promised 3 things. He also delivers through Congress on lower tariffs, and he succeeded in getting America all 3 things. Texas, there's Polk. I was just complimenting you, sir. Hold on. He succeeded in getting us Texas through his rhetoric, even if Tyler officially did it. He succeeded in getting us the Oregon country, and he succeeded in lowering the tariffs. He actually was a politician that kept all of his promises and managed to make them happen. So good on him for that. Bad on him for starting a war, which is totally what is going to happen, because Polk is not done there with just Texas and Oregon. He also has his sights set over here on the beautiful Golden States of California. So Polk says, hey, Mexico, we just kind of took Texas from you, but you weren't really having it anyway since you lost it in 1836. What do you think about selling us California? We'll give you a cool like 25 million for it. What do you think? Mexico was like, bleep you, okay? And that's going to basically be the Mexican-American War. Polk also sends a military attachment led by Zachary Taylor, this dude here. His nickname, by the way, Zachary Taylor will later be president of the United States. His nickname was Old Rough and Ready. Just digest that for a second. Old Rough and Ready. he liked to play practical jokes. Zachary Taylor, it was famous. Like he would have messengers come to his camp looking for the general of the army, Zachary Taylor, and he would be dressed like in like rags and all real lowly dressed, like a old private that's not really wearing his proper uniform, isn't buttoned, his jacket and stuff. And the messenger carrying the important directives from DC would come in asking for where General Taylor was, and he'd come out and mess with them, and then finally be like, "I'm just kidding, it's me." So this is Zachary Taylor. Polk dispatches Taylor to South Texas, to this disputed territory between the Nueces and Rio Grande rivers. And since it is disputed territory and Mexico is claiming it's theirs, the United States is claiming it's theirs, this is going to start the war. And there were many in Congress who were not thrilled by Polk doing this and provoking a war, in a sense, with Mexico, our southern neighbor. Those who were most affronted by this were those that stood the most to lose by basically if these new territories were added and became slave states. So many of the Northern Whigs, especially, were very adamantly against this provocation of war, sending Taylor and our forces down to South Texas and provoking Mexico. One of the new congressmen just elected in 1846 that's actually going to protest against this incursion and this provocation that the Polk does was a very young Whig congressman named Abraham Lincoln from Illinois. And he actually passes, he gets through Congress what was called the Spot Resolution, where he demanded to know where the spot was that Taylor and his forces were attacked by the Mexicans, if it was actually in American territory as we claimed, or whether it was actually in Mexican territory and they were right in attacking us. Where was the spot, Mr. President? Abraham Lincoln is asking. So that was the Spot Resolution by a young Abraham Lincoln. It wasn't that young, it was 1846, but still. And so this is going to begin our first major conflict that is fought primarily on foreign soil, because a lot of it will be fought in Mexico. This is the Mexican-American War from 1846 to 1848. And it was inspired mostly because we wanted land. We were hungry for westward expansion. And remember, that is the term known as manifest destiny. So this is the Mexican-American War, the war from 1846 to 1848 between the United States and Mexico, fought over westward lands. I mentioned how there were some Northern Whigs who especially opposed this war because of fears that newly won territory in the Southwest would become future slave states and throw off the balance of power and extend the institution of slavery. And a notable example of this, remember, is like the young congressman from Illinois, Abraham Lincoln. Now, for the actual fighting, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because I do want us to eventually get to the Civil War before 1301, our class ends. But you should probably know that the Mexican-American War was fought primarily on three fronts. You have the Southwest, which is mainly General Kearny coming from Fort Leavenworth in the Kansas Territory. And he captures Santa Fe, and this is like New Mexico, relatively easily. You have also a U.S. general, captain at this time actually, John C. Fremont, who was dispatched to the northern region of California. And at this time, the white settlers in California were vastly still outnumbered by native people, and even Spanish settlers were more numerous than like American whites in this region. But regardless, in like June of 1846, the American white settlers named John C. Fremont, this captain, as the president of the Bear Republic. And they have on their flag of the Republic of California an actual bear, and they declared themselves independent from Mexico. And then a month later, the United States ships roll into San Francisco Harbor and Monterey Harbor, and they roll up the American flag, and the Bear Republic is no more. So yeah, I guess Californians can say, like Texas, that they were once their own republic, but like for a month. Okay, Texas was a real republic. To any Californians listening, it's true, get over it. Okay, but anyway, so that is what's going to happen there, and that was the California front, the New Mexico Southwest front, and then most of the action, of course, is happening in Mexico. As I mentioned, this was the first major war fought mostly on foreign soil. Here we had some fighting in Canada, but here we go. You're going to have two major generals you need to be aware of. The first was, of course, Zachary Taylor, who was originally, at the center of this, being dispatched by President Polk to this disputed territory between the Nueces and Rio Grande rivers. Zachary Taylor is going to confront the, again, Mexican president, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, at the famous Battle of Buena Vista. And that was a major turning point, and Santa Anna is going to have to turn his forces around or be captured yet again, like he was at the Battle of San Jacinto, because he loses. So Taylor beats Buena Vista there and secures for himself the rank of national hero status. National hero from a war. I wonder what he could eventually become. Oh yeah, like Jackson and the Battle of New Orleans, or like Tippecanoe, William Henry Harrison defeating Tecumseh. Zachary Taylor will become president pretty quickly right after this because of his famed victories. So there at Buena Vista. Now Winfield Scott, Old Fuss and Feathers, I think was his name. So you got Old Rough and Ready and Old Fuss and Feathers. He is the older general, and Winfield Scott was dispatched by Polk when Mexico was still refusing to quit. He goes to Veracruz with his large American army, and he's going to march right into Mexico City, and we actually occupy Mexico City for a brief while during the Mexican-American War. There's the American troops in the big square there in the capital of Mexico. So this will force Mexico to the peace table, and we will work out a treaty called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. So that's the treaty that ends the Mexican-American War. And again, this started in 1846. It ends in 1848, not even 2 years of fighting. And in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, two major things. The annexation of Texas to the United States is confirmed without dispute, with the border being at the, you guessed it, Rio Grande River, right there where we see it on the map today. And the other thing that the very important Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo does is it grants the United States all of the territory of the Southwest. The states of, you ready? California, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, parts of Wyoming, parts of Colorado. Okay, that is a huge deal. We basically just added another third to the land acquisitions of our nation. So that is the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. I remember with the Oregon country that we gained from the British peacefully, with that 49th parallel there now being the new border between us and Canada, we now have what will become eventually, because none of these are states yet, they don't have populations. Keep in mind that there's actually still more native people in these places than there are white American settlers. But eventually the Oregon country will become the states of Idaho, parts of Montana, again, parts of Wyoming right there, the state of Oregon, and the state of Washington. Okay, so that was the Oregon country. And so President Polk, it's pretty impressive. In his 4 years as president, he just gained us all of this right here. It's not too bad, not too shabby a job. And you know, when you're done, you're done. So after Polk got us all this territory, he stepped down. Also the fact that he was dying of cholera. Yeah, so James K. Polk, he does not run for a second term. He says he accomplished all the things he set out to do as president, which he did. And he steps down, and we're going to actually elect that war hero, Zachary Taylor, as a Whig. Whigs really like their war heroes. Remember, William Henry Harrison was a Whig. He lasted 32 days. I'm sure Zachary Taylor will do better than that. Oh, wait, he doesn't? Just a few months in office? Really? Man, the Whigs got some kind of curse going on. They're always picking those war heroes. But yeah, Zachary Taylor will be our next president. James K. Polk, like I said, after leaving the White House, he survives a few more months and then he dies of cholera. So 4 years and done, accomplished all he set out to do, and then dies. Now, to round up this lecture about our manifest destiny, now that we actually are truly from sea to shining sea, from Atlantic to Pacific, let's talk about populating this western area. In 1848, gold is discovered at Sutter's Mill in California, and the big California gold rush really kicks off, which is why we call the NFL team from San Francisco the California 48ers. Just kidding. It's the 49ers because everybody goes the following year. News traveled slowly at this time, right? So that's why you get the name the 49ers. I know Eric or somebody, I'm imagining it's Eric, but maybe I'm stereotyping you as a football fan. Somebody in my classes, I know you watch football and you're like, that's the 49ers, miss. I know, calm down. But anyway, that's going to bring hundreds of thousands of white settlers to California, eager at the prospect of gold. That is called a gold rush. There was also gold rushes in the Black Hills of the Dakotas in this area right here. And there will later in 1896 be a very big gold rush to Alaska, to the Klondike region. That was called the Klondike Gold Rush when everybody ate ice cream. Just kidding. And so you can see the non-native population of California is going to rise from 15,000 in 1848 at the time of like the Bear Republic to 360,000 by the time of the Civil War in 1860. Correspondingly, the Native American population decreases from 150,000 there in California to just 30,000 during that same time span. As white settlers flock along these trails, the California Trail for gold, the Spanish Trail, the Santa Fe Trail, the Mormon Trail out to Salt Lake City in Utah, which is going to make Utah a very Mormon-friendly place, and the famous Oregon Trail. I should read about the Donner Party. You will see the Indian populations being attacked and pushed, and this will create the last Indian Wars, which we'll talk about after the Civil War. And then, because I just don't have another really good place to mention it, now that we have truly sea to shining sea, we're thinking about, maybe expanding our commerce beyond our internal continental borders. America will actually, in 1854, send a detachment under President Millard Fillmore. Yeah, that was his real name, Millard, led by Commodore Matthew Perry. Matthew Perry, just as a side note trivia thing, I think it's kind of cool. He was the younger brother of Admiral Oliver Hazard Perry, who helped us win the War of 1812 by doing that awesome naval battles and stuff on the Great Lakes against the British. So that's Oliver Hazard Perry, his older brother. But Matthew Perry, no relation to the Friends star. Na 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 na. Chandler. That's Matthew Perry. No relation. You guys are probably too young to get that reference anyway. He is going to go with 5 brand new American warships of the day. They have these big, black, intimidating sails, and they sail right into Tokyo Harbor. The Japanese had ancestrally been very isolationist, very closed off, very suspicious of foreigners, and had refused to do trade with much of the Western world, including many European nations and the United States. The one exception they had was 2 port cities where they allowed some trade with the Dutch. So the Japanese are very closed off, distrustful of foreigners. And now with California, we now have the potential to do trade with the Far East, to not only do trade with Japan, but also eventually get our sights set on the big prize, which was trade with China, because China offers not only great wealth and riches, we've talked about since Columbus's time, things such as the silks and spices, the porcelain and etc., but also as our country industrializes more and more, we get more and more factories, we need new markets to sell our American-made goods to. And China presented the biggest prize of them all because of its giant population as in terms of a market. So we were very conscious of trying to expand trade to East Asia now that we had California and the West Coast. And that's what Matthew Perry and his fleet of these black-sailed ships were doing there when they sailed into Tokyo Harbor, where the Emperor of Japan was. And long story short, we basically point our big cannons at the Emperor's palace and say, Japan, we know that you don't like us and don't trust foreigners, but you're going to trade with us, or else, we'll use our cannons and we'll shoot you. And Japan had not industrialized at this point. They didn't have a modern navy like we did. They didn't have factories. They didn't have mass production of weapons. They had guns, of course, they had cannons, but it was only things that they had traded. They didn't have these things mass produced to fight like a full-on war against a country like the United States, an industrial country at this point. So Japan was helpless to do anything. This is called, by the way, this is an actual diplomatic term. When you threaten somebody and you get them to capitulate using overwhelming force, that is called gunboat diplomacy, because of events like this, gunboat diplomacy. And so Matthew Perry was successful. He opens up Japan to trade. And so we will have Japan as a trading partner, but it will have some long-term repercussions. Japan was really woken to the fact that they were behind industrially and at the mercy of Western nations who had industrialized. So this begins in Japan, the Meiji Restoration. This is the period in the late 1800s when they get going, industrializing real fast. And by 1905, little tiny Japan is beating great big Russia in the Sino-Japanese War. And then, of course, in World War I, they were on the side of the Allies. And in 1941, they will bomb Pearl Harbor, and we will see them as our great enemy in World War II. So we kind of put them on the path to industrialization. Japan will be the only non-Western nation of the world that had industrialized and began imperializing in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So there you are. America has expanded from sea to shining sea. We've put off the issues that have divided us, mostly successfully with the compromises and compromises and compromises. But of course, everything going forward is going to be leading to one thing, and that is the Civil War. And the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, our victory against Mexico, and the acquisition of all of this territory out in the West is going to be probably the major impetus beginning us on the road really to a nation divided America at civil war. Thank you for your time. I'll talk to you guys later.